I just basically went on Amazon and got every single book I could find about subscription models, so looked at how does Netflix work? How does any of that work? Like, how is it that you can provide a service for what seems like a ridiculously low price? What is it? What makes that work? And, it really comes down to, okay, it's value over time.
I'm Jack Newton, CEO of Clio, and this is the Daily Matters podcast. On Daily Matters, we talk with legal professionals, industry leaders, and subject matter experts about the future of law. We explore where the legal industry is headed, how legal practice is changing, and what you can be doing to position yourself for success. This episode of Daily Matters is brought to you by the 2020 Clio Cloud Conference, the world's best legal conference, which is going completely virtual for the first time in 8 years. Get your pass now at cliocloudconference.com. Today's guest is Jon Tobin, partner at Counsel for Creators LLP, a next-generation law firm focused on the needs of creative businesses and individuals, and the first law firm to develop subscription services tailored to the needs of creative people. Jon, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack. Glad to be here.
So Jon, starting off, your firm largely works with creatives, and obviously creative professionals have been severely affected, as many other professionals have been, by the pandemic. Tell us about how the world's changed for your law firm and your clients amidst COVID-19.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of changes. There's the obvious changes, people losing their job, companies going out of business, and it really varies from sector to sector. So things like restaurants, obviously more affected than others, but we live here in Los Angeles, film production, live events really ground to a halt. So a lot of people who are in those industries have really been on hiatus for a long time. So we've seen a lot of people where their income has really gone to zero. And so luckily there's been, support in the way of, unemployment assistance and loans and grants for small businesses. So that's helped some people. But I think a lot of people are sort of looking at how they're going to manage this long term. So that's one sort of change. And another one is actually, I'd say a little bit on the positive side, in that a lot of people are now seeing this as an opportunity to finally take that step to build a business. That's something that's actually surprised me.
And is that just out of need, Jon? Do you think that's being born out of necessity, or is this being viewed as an opportunity with maybe the space and the time to pivot what they're doing? People are taking a more entrepreneurial tact.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that. And I think it's a combination of both things, right? So I think there are some people who have been put in this position where their job is going away or has gone part-time, or their main source of income has dried up. And so they're naturally moving towards creating a new business. And other people, I think they are working from home and find they have extra time. They're not commuting, or, other sort of out of the home commitments are smaller. So now they have extra time. So there are people who do still have day jobs, who do still have employment, but on the side are like, well, I have a few hours every day. Let me see what I can do. Let me see if I can make a new product or a new service or something that they can get out to people. And, again, it sort of varies. You have people who are, again, necessity, and others who are just seeing the opportunity and taking it.
So Jon, tell us a bit more about your career path. You've had an interesting career path, working first as a designer and a software developer before eventually becoming a lawyer. Tell us about that path and maybe how it's informed how you've designed your legal services.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, it's interesting. I didn't start out as a lawyer. That wasn't my first career. This is actually my second career. I started out, when I was younger, I was really into computers, programming, taught myself a lot of this. And when I guess Web 1.0 came out, I was sort of right there in the thick of things. I worked for a lot of startups, some larger companies, established companies, a lot of record labels here in Los Angeles. So I really got into design, web development, graphic design, programming, the whole sort of range of things that you could do. At one point, I was working for a larger company that was being acquired, and I started getting interested in the, sort of business end of things. And so my sort of path became, well, do I go sort of MBA route, or do I go law school route? I chose law school. I just found that interesting, found it fascinating. Went to UCLA Law, learned more about intellectual property, business law, corporate law, sort of how companies are structured, because that's what I became interested in. I'd worked for companies pretty much all of my working life, and I wanted to know, okay, what's going on underneath? How are How does ownership work? What does it mean when a company is acquired? How does intellectual property work? All these things I'd heard about, but didn't really know I wanted to get more into. And so I've been able to sort of blend those two things together now.
And tell us about the evolution of subscription services at Counsel for Creators LLP. And this is an area I'm really passionate about. I think there's so much opportunity for subscription services to be deployed much more pervasively than they are in the legal industry today. Tell us about that journey to realizing that subscription services are maybe the right business model for your law firm, and tell us what kind of iterations you've gone in terms of deploying those into your law firm, and what kind of uptake and adoption you've seen among your clients.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Naturally, a few years back, I don't know how many people were doing subscriptions. I know some people were. There are a few people who have been doing subscriptions for quite a while. But initially for us, it sort of came from a problem that we saw our clients having. And I think this is really the core of what makes a subscription work, which is we'd see people having legal problems that if they'd only come to us 6 months earlier, right? If they had talked to us about that contract or trademark or whatever it was 6 months prior, whatever legal issue they're facing now wouldn't have been such a huge problem. They would have been able to take proactive action to prevent this sort of future problem. So we kind of looked at the problem. And I think one of the things is when lawyers bill hourly or even flat fee, it's this barrier. Like somebody just wants to call an attorney. They just want to, get on the phone for 15 minutes. And sometimes that's all it takes to avoid really large headaches, right? And so they didn't want to pay thousands of dollars in retainer. They didn't want to pay a flat fee. So we created this model. We're like, well, let's see if we can make it cheap as a way for people to just get their questions answered quickly. And it actually started where I think what I did was created a calendar, like an acuity calendar, where people could sign up for sessions, right? So they could sign up, pay $100 and get like a half-hour session with us. But then that sort of evolved into a subscription. We realized a lot of people had ongoing needs. So it wasn't just once that they needed us, but more than once, especially as they're growing a business. A lot of questions came up, or even questions they didn't know they had. So we decided, okay, well, let's make this a recurring model and see if people like that. And at the time, we had no idea whether or not that would work. We had no idea whether people would be into that, if that actually solved the problem. So from there, it sort of iterated to what it is today.
And what have you seen in terms of that iteration? Have you seen most of the people that were booking ad hoc on acuity transfer into a subscription model service? And what's your ongoing engagement model once they get into that subscription model with you?
Yeah, so some people actually, prefer the old way. So there's a few people who, are like, hey, I'd rather just pay you guys hourly for whatever reason. Maybe it's just familiar. And it's usually people who have dealt with lawyers before. So they kind of already know, I've had a company, so I get that I'll pay $400 an hour and I'm fine with that, right? So not everybody necessarily wants or needs a subscription, but for those who do, I think the uptake has been pretty steady, overall. And so really what we try to do, is find people who we can serve on an ongoing basis. That works best for everybody. So people who are looking to build a company, looking to sort of have that ongoing relationship. And that's what we focus on, like with our engagement. It's really about how can we provide some ongoing value to people, and not just sort of a transactional thing where it's like we did your trademark and we're done, but how can we support you? How can we support your business? And especially now, like we've been really trying to take that deeper, as people are sort of making these changes, or as we were talking about earlier, starting new businesses and maybe don't necessarily know what things to think about. Like, even something like marketing, they might not even know, hey, how do I do this? What do I do? And so we've worked with so many businesses. It's really nice that we can sort of share what we've seen working for others with people who are just starting out.
So can you tell us, just from a nuts and bolts perspective, how your subscription offering works, John? How's it work from a sizing perspective? What are your clients signing up for? What do they get as part of that subscription service?
Yeah, so just, on the most basic level, what it is, it's a $95 subscription service. And we chose that price because we wanted to make it accessible. And there's obviously a lot of different price points you can do in subscription, but we just happened to choose $95 because we felt like that's something for any business owner, even if they're brand new, it should be relatively accessible. And what they get is attorney phone calls and document reviews. So that's really the start. That's how we started that. That was the main thing that was offered. So just if you need to call us, don't worry about it. Just pick a time on my schedule. I'll see that you have scheduled and I'll give you a call. It's really that easy. Same thing with document review. You submit it through a form. We'll take a look. We'll give you our notes. And if you need to discuss it, we can discuss it. So it's just really for those smaller things. And now it's sort of evolved. We have a member network where we post content, or we have videos about different legal issues. So it's really expanded to, to sort of help people understand the legal issues. We realize there's a lot of need for education. So business owners might not necessarily know, what are trademarks for? How do board of directors work? So we're trying to help people we're trying to support people by teaching them what all of this stuff means in a way that's easy, that's very clear. So.
Do you find there's a lot of education to be done with prospective clients around why subscription services might make sense? You commented earlier about, being able to shift to a bit more of a proactive versus reactive model, and all the opportunities that opens up, both to get ahead of your legal needs, but also to ultimately maybe spend less as well, if you're not chasing after problems as opposed to designing around them. Can you tell me a bit about just maybe the different frame that you need to get clients into as they think about engaging in subscription services versus the more traditional hourly model?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things we always sort of talk about is just being proactive about legal issues. So we want to get people into that frame of mind that lawyers aren't people you go to when a problem comes up. I mean, obviously you can do that, but really the best way to use lawyers, and the cheaper way to use lawyers, is to talk to us before something bad happens. And I explain to clients, especially people who are new in business, that every business has lawyers. Every business has a legal team. So any business that that's of a certain size is going to have a lawyer. And the reason why is because what businesses are doing are trying to avoid problems. They're trying to avoid lawsuits, trying to avoid disputes with their customers, trying to avoid disputes with partners, right? So if we can do that, then that's going to be a great value, right? So if we can, in the space of a month, prevent a few different problems from arising 6 months later, that's great, and so, sometimes it involves proving a counterfactual, like, hey, we prevented this from happening. But I think people really get what it is we're doing. And, for a lot of people, that education does come. People have an image of a lawyer as, somebody who goes to court, right? So something's gone wrong. We're going to sue somebody. We're going to send a threatening letter. That's when I need a lawyer. And so I kind of try to take them back. Well, let's not get to that point. Let's not get to the point where we're going to court or sending letters to people. Let's try to avoid that.
Right. It's kind of like going to the doctor when you've got a 4-inch tumor growing out of your neck.
That's the analogy I always use with people. I always talk about, you go to your doctor regularly if you can, if it's available. You go to your doctor regularly. If you feel something weird, go to your doctor early. Don't wait to go to the operating room if you can, so if it's available. That's so, and I explain to people, like, litigation, going to court, that's like going in for a major procedure.
And tell us about, internally, we've talked a bit about the client perspective on subscription services. From a law firm perspective, what are some of the pros and cons that you've experienced in implementing subscription services? Tell us what some of your learnings have been over the course of implementing subscription services in your law firm.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first thing we've had to do is really change the way that we approach things. So again, moving from that transactional mindset that a lawyer might have, where I'm going to do a project for a client and then be done, to how can we support this relationship long term, right? And so that, again, that involves regular contact with people. We have to reach out proactively to get them to, to make sure that we're staying in touch, so that they're using our services and we're sort of learning what they're doing. One of the things that kind of becomes becomes bigger and bigger the more this grows is retention. You run a subscription business as well, and you need to make sure people are happy, that people are continually happy to pay you.
Right.
And if they're not happy, they'll stop paying, and they should. They should stop paying if they're not getting value. And so our challenge is even less, it's not so much, how can we get more people, but how can we make the people that we have happy, right? Because it's much, from a business perspective, cheaper to keep a client than it is to have to find a new one. So that's, that's sort of how we've had to change our thinking about our business. I think the disadvantages or the difficulties come early on, right? Because there is a little bit of investment. There's investment in technology, so you have to have a good system set up. Obviously, if you have a subscription with a couple of people, no big deal. You can use a spreadsheet, and you can just bill them whenever you want. But as you get to dozens or even into triple digits, you have a whole new set of concerns. You need to sort of be able to track what's going on with hundreds of people, right? So you need to have a good system set up. So that takes a little bit of investment in terms of time or energy. You also need to, realize you might not make profit, for a little while, right? So I don't know if, I think for the first year or two, it was, it was kind of hit or miss. We weren't sure, is this something that's going to work? Is this just a waste of money? Is this a waste of time? And so there is sort of that, I guess, dip that you have in revenue a little bit that you have to get over eventually.
And is that dip part of figuring out how do you cost your services appropriately, or is it because you've got your customer acquisition costs front loaded and you're making those acquisition costs back slowly over the course of the subscription? It feels like there's a few economic components to figure out here. Can you tell us how you've unpacked that and how you look at the analysis of what's the right amount to charge for this subscription service, and how do I make sure that when I account for all the time and expense that's gone into servicing that client, I'm actually coming out on top? And I'm curious, based on what you just said, if you're willing to look at it and say, hey, I'm in it's kind of a J-shaped curve. I'm going to be in a trough for the first 2 or 3 months or maybe longer, but I'm eventually going to be profitable on this client if I'm able to, as you point out, retain them in the long term.
Yeah. I mean, the only way you can actually really make money with a subscription is through retention, right? So, depending on what our acquisition cost is at the time, if we get a new client on our subscription service, we don't make any money because we're still paying back essentially what it costs to acquire that person, right? So what it really comes down to, I think for us, at a certain point, you get to a critical mass where you can really kind of guide the development based on metrics. So, we've really got into feedback, like what's going to make someone stay longer? Like, how can we look at an aggregate number like average lifetime customer value and increase that, right? So it's not so much about every individual transaction, like, how much is this customer going to make us, but on average, how is this going to look? And so if our lifetime customer value is significantly higher than the acquisition cost, okay, we're in business, or, whatever, plus like the servicing cost, et cetera. That's what we want to do. So we really want to increase that lifetime value. And so that's kind of how we think about it. But, like you're sort of saying, that value doesn't come on day one. That value comes on, 4 months in, right? So it takes, a few months for that value to sort of come to us.
Can you walk our listeners that are maybe interested in framing what a subscription model might do for their business in terms of how you looked at the data, what key performance indicators you looked at to size up how you should be pricing your subscription services, and how you manage the expense side, the expense being your time and service and expenses that are going into servicing those clients?
Yeah. So, as far as looking at the numbers, it starts, obviously, we look at, what's coming in monthly, right? So one of the biggest numbers, I think, for any subscription business is going to be monthly recurring revenue. So how much is coming in every month on the subscription service? And then we sort of look at, well, how many, and this can be a simple calculation. And I think for the first few months, it was actually pretty simple. We'd look at how many hours then are we are we putting towards each client? And then what we actually do is sort of figure out like where our hourly rate is, how that compared to our hourly rate. Remember, in the early days, I would just pull the numbers and run the spreadsheets, and sort of look at, okay, so, if we have 20 people, again, this is very early on, then, and I'm spending this many hours working with that group of 20, what is it on average, right? And so we're trying to keep that average, maybe close to what we do hourly, but, what that allows us to do is if somebody needs more help, we can give them more help. And if somebody doesn't need us for a while, like, we sort of will help them later. So, it's sort of, you're kind of pooling everyone together. But I think the key indicator is recurring revenue and then lifetime customer value, customer acquisition cost, things like that.
So as a SaaS company founder, these are all acronyms and
Oh yeah.
KPIs that I talk about on a daily basis with my team. Tell me about where you go to for resources and learning about subscription businesses. Do you look at software as a service as a reference point for how you think about the economics of your business?
Yeah, I think software as a service is a great example. Always a good place to start. Look at what works, and there's a lot of experts out there. There's books by one of the authors whose work I really like, Robbie Kellman Baxter. She's written a few different books on how the subscription model works. So I think I started there, and I think when we were starting out, like I just basically went on Amazon and got every single book I could find about subscription models. So looked at how does Netflix work? How does any of that work? Like how is it that you can provide a service for what seems like a ridiculously low price? What is it? What makes that work? And, it really comes down to, okay, it's value over time, so it's people
Right.
paying you over time rather than at once. So again, it was kind of this weird transition when we started. If we had a client come to us and, we could maybe potentially get them to pay us $800 right now for a consultation of some sort, it was kind of tough because we're like, well, really what we should have them do is join the subscription because that's what we're trying to build. So immediately we're foregoing, let's say $700. So that was, that's what I'm sort of saying. You have to have this mindset shift and be willing to take a loss on the very short term, hoping that you can do the right thing to make it up long term.
Right. And economists in the limit really do prefer software as a service or any kind of subscription business over the pre-packaged model. And we've seen this shift with software companies, for example. Software has moved from the big upfront purchase where you went and spent $500 or $600 buying the shrink wrap version of Microsoft Office, right, to paying for Office 365 and paying $20 or $30 a month for that same software. And the long-term profitability, and as you pointed out, if you have the right retention characteristics for a subscription service, can be vastly superior to the fixed upfront price. And I'm curious to get your perspective on how pervasive you think this model will become in legal. Is this the right business model for most practices, and how do you think about whether an individual practice area or an individual practice is suitable for a subscription model?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of gone back and forth. Some days I feel like really optimistic, like this could work for everybody. But then on other days, I sort of feel like, well, maybe you have to really look closely at what it is that you're doing in your practice. So, and maybe it's a bad joke, but I sometimes joke about like a criminal law practitioner right, doing a subscription service, right? Right. It's like, hey, I noticed you get into a lot of trouble, so join this subscription service, and you can give me a call anytime you
or
do
divorce
sketchy.
Lawyer.
Yeah, divorce lawyer. I mean, but even with that, you've seen people. You can actually build, like Aaron Levine has Hello Divorce, where
right,
maybe for a specific period of time, if there's a year you're going through a divorce, that's exactly what you need. And maybe, I don't know if she's built her model in a way that accounts for, okay, this person will maybe take a year and they'll need us for a year, and that's fine, So I think for, not every practice area is going to lend to it, but it's really, what ongoing value can you provide, so, and that might not just be services. It could also be education, right? It could be, again, if you're a criminal lawyer, maybe there is something you can provide. It might not be services, but it might be, how do you, kind of rehabilitate after coming out of prison or something, right? So
absolutely. Yeah. We've talked a lot about that on this podcast. What's the restorative justice side of things look like? And lawyers have a huge role to play in terms of helping some of these individuals re-enter society and reintegrate successfully. Right. And again, I think your point around Hello Divorce and Aaron Levine's work is a great example of ways you can be innovative on pricing without necessarily going to the degree of a subscription service. There's models that are superior to the hourly model without necessarily taking the huge leap to a subscription service.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Jon, if you can talk for a moment about the impacts of COVID-19 on your firm. Especially, it sounds like you have clients that are both more on the traditional hourly model versus the subscription model. How have you seen those two segments of your business be impacted by COVID-19?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, and before we got on, actually, we were sort of discussing, sort of what's happened in business, and I've been really surprised at how everything's played out. So the subscription, I think, has been pretty steady. Actually, it's been steadily growing. I think, like I was saying earlier, a lot of people are starting businesses and need some guidance, need some support. So we're there for them on that. The other thing we do, obviously, for more involved projects are flat rate things. So if somebody needs to register a trademark or set up a corporation, we do flat rate. Interestingly enough, that hasn't slowed down. I think there was a dip maybe like the beginning of April where nobody was certain what was going to happen. Like, is this the end? What's going to happen, right? But since then, it's remained pretty steady. I mean, my partner and I remember we made projections like in the beginning of April, looking at like, okay, so we're going to make like no money in May. And it didn't turn out that way. So I was really surprised. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. A lot of people are now seeing this as a chance, either by necessity or opportunity, to start a business, or I think maybe new opportunities are presenting themselves where people are realizing, oh, okay, I don't need to start a restaurant, but I can do a good takeout business that might actually thrive because I'll have low overhead and I can sort of start very small and build my way out. So you see people who are really being innovative. I'm actually really surprised and encouraged by that.
Yeah, I think there's, as you commented earlier, a silver lining, to obviously a devastating backdrop for what COVID-19 has done in many areas of our lives. But it feels like there's a lot of innovation, a lot of entrepreneurial thinking happening everywhere, including in the delivery of legal services.
Yeah.
When you talk about building empathy for your clients and being able to get deeper with your clients thanks to this subscription relationship versus a more transactional relationship. Can you talk about how you've trained both yourself and maybe your team in terms of how to approach those conversations in a different way? Because I do think the default, as you mentioned earlier, the default for many lawyers in terms of how they look at transactions is as transactions and not really a deeply empathetic process where you're trying to understand how can I help my client in a more systematic way? How can I understand their broader context and help them both as a lawyer, but maybe even use the benefit of your experience to bring in other service providers or help point them in the right direction in other areas of their business. You've alluded to a few elements of that over the course of our conversation. I'm wondering if you can go a bit more deeply on that particular aspect and just talk about the experience of shifting your own mindset and that of your team to a more engaged and empathetic model.
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's actually something that, especially now with COVID, that's, maybe that was something that we've always valued, but now it's like shot to the top, like way past any other priority. And I think as lawyers grow, you sort of start as like the beginning lawyer, everything is, really intellectual. It's really like, what does the law say? What do I need to do? Like, how do I explain the law to a client? And then as you grow, you ultimately begin to learn that people are coming to you because they have a need, and it might be an emotional need of like, I just want to feel like my business is secure. I want to feel like I'm doing the right thing. I want to make sure I get along with my clients. I want to make sure that, I'm being fair with others while still sort of, asserting myself, right? So there's all these different emotional needs that people are coming for. And I think, what this has allowed me to do is sort of come to those. Like, no one's going to say to you, hey, like, I'm feeling really insecure about my business. Can you help me? Right. But that's always the sort of subtext. And if you can address that, people love it. And I love doing it. Like my favorite conversations are the ones where someone calls me and they're like, I've not been able to sleep. I have a knot in my stomach. Someone told me that I'm infringing or whatever it is. I'm nervous, I'm anxious. And then half an hour later, they're like, oh man, I feel like a weight has been lifted, and it's like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but the fact that I can produce that effect is awesome, and so we really try to figure out how can we do that. And the more we know people, the more we can sort of be, I guess for lack of a better term, real with them. We can really sort of just be real people talking to other people. We don't really feel like we have to have this facade of like, okay, we're professionals and we, we're going to tell you exactly what to do and what the law is, but like really get in there and be like, oh yeah, that sounds terrible. And I've, or just to tell someone, hey, I've seen this happen before. You're not the first person this has happened to. Other people have had their IP stolen, and here's what they do. Here's what happens. Here's how this plays out. To give that reassurance is really cool.
Yeah, I think an example I talk about a lot in terms of the need for empathy, but also the opportunity for something like a subscription service to actually better address the underlying pain point a client has is with wills and estates, where if you look at somebody coming to you for a will, they might be transactional to start, say, I need a will. But if you kind of dig at their underlying pain point, what they're trying to address, really they're saying, I want peace of mind, and I want to know that my family's taken care of if I pass away unexpectedly. And if you're really calibrating to that pain point and trying to solve for that longer term, maybe it's not a $500 upfront fee to produce a will. Maybe it's a $50 a year subscription service for a will that's updated annually. And you get a short questionnaire just saying, hey, have you gotten married? Has anything changed in your life? And again, you need to take that forward-looking view and say, hey, over the lifetime value for that client, I might be able to realize $2,500 or more rather than $500. But I'm going to be, as you pointed out, giving up that short-term revenue opportunity. But it does feel like a gigantic opportunity for lawyers to completely flip the script in terms of how they work with their clients, how they're building empathy with their clients. And as you mentioned, it doesn't work maybe for every practice area, but it feels like many lawyers should be thinking about whether this could be even partially adapted to their practice area. Tell us a little bit about how this impacts your mental state, your happiness, your level of engagement, and to the extent you can speak for your team, how does this impact them at a mental well-being level? Have you heard anything in terms of how this model has benefited them as opposed to the client side, which we focus most of our discussion on?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I feel, it's nice to have that rapport. I mean, that's always something that's valuable. I think people when we see someone sign up for a call, like we know who this person is. Like we've all, at least one of us has talked with them. So, if somebody's, signs up for a call with me and, I see their name, I can talk with my partner, I can talk with anyone else who works on my team and be like, hey, what is this person like? What do they need? And, really, really kind of get to know people. And I think, it's sort of, I don't know, it just gives us a chance to solve problems easily. It really there's not so much pressure, right? So it's like if somebody pays us like 10 grand, to solve a problem, then I think there's a lot of pressure. But I think, when someone pays $95, we can really get there and not feel like, there's a whole, I don't know how to put this, but like, the whole pressure, right? So we can, and we kind of get the feedback quickly, that's the other thing. We're really big on like getting feedback. Like we send out surveys and net promoter score things to find out like, okay, did they have a good interaction? And we can kind of know that way. And so I think
maybe it's just that flavor of the transactional element of the traditional model makes you feel like you've got to give this highly polished final work product and kind of hand off, and that you're not building this continuous conversation and iterative approach to how you're designing solutions. Would love to, for a moment, talk about technology. On your website, you talk about the fact that you take an informed, tech-savvy approach to working with your clients. I think technology is obviously something I'm really passionate about and can have a huge impact on law firms and the way they operate, and specifically how they are interacting with their clients. And that's obviously more relevant now with COVID-19 than ever. Can you talk a little bit about how you use technology to better serve your clients, and maybe also in ways that helps make your firm internally more productive?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of my, it's one of my favorite things to do is honestly. So here's what my philosophy with technology is: the really only thing that a computer can do or technology can do is automate things, right? So if you really kind of break it down, like what does a computer do? It automates rote tasks. And so what we try to do is look for those rote tasks that, are pretty much like low value tasks, and automate as much as we can. Right. And so, again, even things like, this doesn't need to be a big deal. It doesn't need to be like some AI system that, automates drafting a contract. It can be as simple as, rather than doing the back and forth of scheduling a time, you just have a calendar, right? So that's an automation. It's the calendar where someone can choose. It sends the confirmation. No human needs to be involved in that necessarily, right? And so we take things, and I get that some people might feel like, well, doesn't have a human touch, but I'm like, I'd rather save the human touch for the high level things. So the phone call that we have, the notes that I write about your contract, I want to spend my time doing that and not negotiating phone call times. And nobody else on the team wants to do that either, right? And so we can kind of push human beings to do things that are more fulfilling and that have more value to clients, right? So solving problems, right? And so what we really try to do is automate things. So any kind of notification that people get from our office, it's all automated, so we don't, we give status updates all the time to people just through our automated system. If there's a support issue, a lot of that is automated. I mean, even things like our content, if we have a question that's asked all the time, like what's the trademark process like? We have email templates that we'll send to people and be like, hey, here's an article we wrote, check this out. If that doesn't answer the questions, here's our calendar, let's talk about it,
Yeah. Love it. I think that's a great way of framing it too. Just take what consumers are looking for, which is, I think you're 100% right, effortless experiences. They're looking for ways of eliminating friction. They'd rather fill out a form on your website than they would answer a phone-based interview, for example. Just recognizing that consumer expectations have shifted, and there's opportunities to automate and streamline that go along with those new consumer sentiments. Jon, to wrap up, I think you have a really interesting and unique perspective on the opportunity to innovate in legal. Your background, legal being your second career, gives you maybe a different perspective on where innovation can and should be happening in legal. Can you speak beyond some of the innovative work you're doing on subscription services, where you think those opportunities really lie in legal and where you'd like to see more progress over the next handful of years?
For sure. I mean, my opinion is that a lot of the value that can be created now is customer experience. So I think if lawyers can focus on customer experience, and that encompasses a lot of things, everything from pricing to how you answer the phone to how quickly you get back to people, but really like making hiring a lawyer be a good experience. Because it even affects me. I mean, I have selfish reasons because people will think, hey, hiring a lawyer has to be this really painful experience, and that's the sort of impression we've given people, right? So I think innovation can be just making the customer experience better, and that doesn't require necessarily even any code. It can be just making your system a little bit different, asking different questions, making sure that people feel heard and understood, that you're sort of getting to those emotional needs that people have, right? So it's going to be the customer experience, but then, and that also goes into things, so then you can go into automation, right? And so, and I think one of the things that I try to tell people is innovation doesn't need to be a big thing, right? So I think a lot of people, maybe get intimidated, lawyers get intimidated, they'll hear people doing things with blockchain or AI or chatbots, things that they just can't get their head around. And I think a lot of people can't, and I tell them, you don't have to do that. Like that's a certain level and that has a certain value. But I mean, even just streamlining your customer intake, getting on FormStack or any other, form intake program and making a form is going to be improving your customer experience, and it can be incremental. It doesn't need to be, I have a new business model and I'm putting all this effort into it. It can just be, I'll make a little change, see what people don't like and make that better. See what people do like and do more of it, so it's incremental.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point. If you make small incremental gains on a daily basis, those accumulate over time and they can have massive impacts on your firm. So I think that's a great parting thought as well, is taking this view that you don't need to boil the ocean and do this gigantic redesign of your law firm and how it works top to bottom. Listen to what appeals to you and what you think would resonate with your clients and start making those stepwise improvements. And it can be very incremental and a very easy thing to kind of ease into over time.
Yeah, and what's great is it can be surprisingly simple. You can look at the software you're already using, whether it's Clio or something else, and are there features you maybe haven't used yet? Is there something that you can sort of bring into your practice? A kind of system you haven't tried, like marketing automation, and maybe just try it with one tiny thing.
Yeah, try it with one client.
Yeah, one client. Maybe one type of interaction. Hey, I'm going to set up an email that goes out when someone hires me. That's innovation. It's small, but it's a step in the right direction.
Well, Jon, it's a great note to end on. Loved our conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Boland, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast.